Okay, so today's talk is going to be about why should this exist and 5 other questions I ask when I'm designing a game. So it's very much from my perspective. Okay, this is the best photo I could find of me. And it's Halloween, so I kind of wanted to celebrate that. When I go home, I have to sort out my Halloween costume and get dressed up with my family. So, in terms of, first, my contact details, if anyone wants to reach out on Discord or Instagram. A bit of background about me, I come from kind of an arts background, and community arts and community development, creative problem solving, conflict resolution, like in Northern Ireland. So the skills I've learned along the way inform my approach to design thinking, problem solving, even like product development. Okay, so I'm generally known for this. So this is I think by the time we finished with Story Cubes, this was the lineup of the product range. It was a lot of time and a lot of effort building that up. Yes, okay. And so you'll see some other products that I'll reference in the background as well. So first of all, hands up, who owns a copy of Rory Story Cubes? Excellent. And this is for bonus points. Who uses them for role playing? Yes, yes, excellent.
With many, many, many children.
Brilliant. Okay, so I think, and sometimes I worry that people know me for Rory Story Cubes, and that's it. So I kind of wanted to give you a timeline of kind of our company and our business and the things we've done. So 2004, I first had the idea for Rory Story Cubes, the same time that our first daughter was born. So this is like my second child. It started life as a Rubik's Cube. I ran out to a shop, bought a Rubik's Cube, drew out the icons, cut them out, put them onto it, and started playing with it. It actually started life as a creative problem solving tool, because I was doing like life coaching and personal development. But despite my best efforts of thinking I might sell 1,000 copies of this to coaches around the world, people kept making stories with it. And so I kind of had to react and say, okay, there's maybe something more going on here. And that Rory Story Cubes had a life of its own, that I hadn't kind of planned for it, but my job was to like facilitate it in the world. 2010 was like the first trade show that we kind of, first Nuremberg that we attended in Essen. 2011, we had sold 1 million copies and reached #1 on Amazon in the US in toys and games. Largely, to the help of all of the amazing distributors we worked with and game rights who had the license to the game in the US. So not to kind of repeat ourselves, we started doing the mix sets, which allowed us to explore different themes simultaneously, so people could buy the different sets they liked. But we always had the goal of these completing into 9 cube sets. Like that was the overarching goal for us, and our partners really appreciated the fact that we were kind of stringing it out isn't quite the right word, but that's kind of what we were doing. We weren't flooding the market with our game, and it also gave me time to work on them as well. In 2013, we created a product that's probably the second most impactful thing that we've ever made, but you will know nothing about. It's called the Extraordinaires Design Studio, and I'll mention that briefly on the next slide, because this is all relevant to the questions I ask. 2015, we started created license sets as well. That was a whole other headache that we dealt with, and a lesson in who to listen to and who not to listen to. By 2016, we'd sold 7 million copies across the range of Rory Story Cubes, and it was getting really stressful for us. We were watching our staff having fun in the company, and myself and my partner Anita were just like, we're managing people, it wasn't satisfying, and we were always at different times wanted to throw the towel in. Also, we were seeing it was getting to a scale where we weren't the best people to look after it. So I'm really good at championing new ideas, but not so much at like managing people and selling into mass market and things like that. So but we knew people were still discovering Rory story cubes. So do we like hold on tightly to it and watch it like kind of cap out, or do we hand it over to somebody who can kind of look after it going into the future? And it turned out, whatever people think about Asmodee, they were by far the best partner for us, and they were the most considerate of our existing distributors as well. And so we negotiated that they would hold on to the distribution rights for a year, which is kind of unheard of. So it gave all of our distributors time to transition away from Rory story cubes as a kind of cornerstone product in their catalogue. Luckily, some were also bought by Asmodee, and that would have been a loss of control for us, because essentially the majority of our customer would have become Asmodee, going from 30% to 60% of our kind of distribution partners. So in 2017 we finally said, okay, we're going to make some new games. We finally had the mental energy to do it. And we brought out Untold and Blank, and again I'll talk about these a bit more. 2018 we followed up with Holding On. 2019 Mega City Oceania and Flip Over Frog. 2020 was during the height of COVID. These games like appeared and disappeared. So I brought one just to prove that it exists. So that was Adventure Mart and Prism Arena, and then 2021 Combo Clash. At which point I had been trying to help like our kind of shrinking team get through COVID, and by 2021 I kind of said I've had enough. I'm spending my time looking after all of you, and I'm not looking after myself. So I kind of had to let people go at that point and take a break. So kind of Essen and this event is my kind of re-emergence into the world of kind of game design as well, because I kind of hung up that hat for a year or so. You can also see, we changed the company name between 2017 and 2018 so that our team would feel more involved, because they used to say Rory Story Cubes is your product, like, or your game, not ours. So we wanted them to feel involved in collectively moving forward. And our ethos was we'd make games that would generate enough money to allow us to keep making games. Like, that's what we wanted to do, and that we could stand over those games. So, very quickly, the Extraordinaires Design Studio is probably more of an activity. We tried to make it a game, and it was a struggle, but it basically puts players into the role of designers, but they're designing objects, everyday objects for extraordinary characters. That's the pitch of the game. So it teaches the principles of design thinking through play and exploration by designing for like a spy, a time traveler, a werewolf, a giant, but you're making like a chair or a bag or somewhere to sleep or a mode of transport. And it uses all the thinkings that a designer would use. We developed this in response to a need in the UK in 2011. The curriculum changed, and we were kind of left with, do we make this game or not? And again, when I go through the questions, you'll see why we decided to go ahead and make this. So this is sold throughout the schools in the US, where they have transitioned over to project-based learning in many cases, and this is probably one of the few resources available for them to use in that setting. Untold Adventures Await was essentially our goal to bring more people into role-playing by making it more accessible, and I was really kind of frustrated with what I was seeing as like my first role-playing game. I wanted to give people like just enough experience of the key elements of role-playing so that then they could maybe go on and explore it further. I worked with John Fiore on that one. Blank was a game by Henri Kumrak. Its nickname, again, which I'll refer to, is Uno Legacy. It's as simple to play as Uno, but every time you play the game, you're making changes to the game, so you become personally attached to it, because every time you win, you get to make a new rule, and you write it onto like one of the cards or one of the rule cards that come into play. So the game is constantly evolving, and it becomes a very kind of personal memento of the group that you're playing with. Holding On was essentially the game where I wanted to sucker punch players into feeling something as they play the game. That was my starting point for it. In this, you work together as nurses caring for Billy Kerr, who's been brought into your hospital, and you're told he's got hours to live. but he's saying, I can't go yet because I need to set things right. So the game is about you balancing between providing physical and emotional care for Billy, helping him kind of gaining confidence so that he'll reveal elements of his life, and essentially let go of the three things that are keeping him holding on. Mega City Oceania is a game inspired by Jordan Draper's Tokyo Jutaku. Has anyone heard of that? Very simple kind of speed playing tile laying game that's about building like buildings in Tokyo. When Jordan showed me, I said, I couldn't hide it. I kind of went, oh. I thought it was going to be about building a city. And because they had these incredible shapes, but they were all laid flat, and I was immediately playing with them and standing them upright and seeing what I could create with them. And I said, like, why don't the players have something to see at the end of the game that they've kind of created together. So I asked them if we could license the concept of Tokyo Jutaku, and I went back and pitched it to the team of essentially, can we trick Eurogamers into playing? That was my pitch. And this is what Michael Fox in collaboration with Jordan Draper came up with. Flip Over Frog is a game that we licensed in from Garani in Japan. An amazingly simple game of kind of memory and area control. Sells for like $15. Really, really good fun. Adventure Mart, again, we licensed because of a delay in another product or another game. And again, kind of really nice art. You're shopkeepers and you're trying to essentially acquire as much gold through a really fun auction mechanism in this. Prism Arena is kind of like my pride and joy, where I literally poured my heart and soul into this game and then watched it disappear through COVID. But in this game, you're young recruits training to become guardians of hope in a time of despair, and you're sparring with each other in the arena, gaining prism powers, unlocking levels, and gaining new powers and abilities. This came about in response to myself and John loving HeroClix, but saying it had gotten way too complex to play or introduced to new players. So we wanted to create a game that was really quick to learn and leveled up with the players as they learned more about it. So finally, Combo Clash is an amazing combo scoring game by Nero. And again, we took the game and developed it and got it ready for release. So before we proceed with the actual questions, the caveat is it's my perspective on all of this. I hope it's useful, and I hope it, you maybe ask, how does this question apply to kind of my approach to design? But for me, I consider myself a change maker. Like, I try to do things that make a difference in the world, and I try to get people to think differently about themselves and the world around them. So that always informs, before I make a game, I'm coming from that perspective usually, and I consider like my materials paper and card. I don't see myself as a game designer, but I use the tools of paper and card to kind of create things that hopefully will have an impact in the world through play. So, first question is, why should this exist? And there's kind of a couple of reasons why I asked this. One is because there's more and more games being released. So, why should someone play my game? Like, why should they pick it up? And how do I get the attention of the publisher? The other reason is, I know making a game is really hard and really challenging. I find it particularly challenging and emotional and lots of other things. So why am I going to put the effort into making that game? So probably a good example is the Extraordinaires Design Studio. When we said, why are we going to push ahead with this? We kind of had this picture of, do you know who Jonathan Ives is? He used to be the lead designer at Apple, was involved in the iPod, the iPhone. And so we said, okay, if we can create this game and in 30 years time, somebody is being knighted by the Queen. We didn't know she was going to die at that point. So someone is being knighted and they say, you know, what inspired you to become, you know, a designer who changed the world? And they say, well, I was given this thing called the Extraordinary Design Studio when I was little, and it kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities of design. I'd go, that's a job well done. So that was always our thinking behind making the Extraordinary Design Studio. If it kind of like has an impact on one person in the world, that they go on to make a difference, everything we do is worth the effort. So yeah, and it applies to many of the other games we have. I'm going to fire through these so that we can maybe talk more at the end. What can I bring to make this different? Again, this ties it into kind of, for me, justifying why I'm working on this thing. Like, I don't want to just make a game for a game's sake, but like, what's the angle or the prior experience I have that I can bring to this game to make it interesting? An example might be with Holding On. We based it on a character called Billy Kerr from Northern Ireland. And part of the reason for doing that was because we thought, well, if anyone else is going to tell a story about like Northern Ireland, it will be about a war game, you know, or about Catholics and Unionists and things like that. And we wanted to show a different perspective, and we felt uniquely placed to tell this story. And like the double twist is, in the game, Billy Kerr would be considered to be from a Unionist or Protestant background. I would be considered, like, not that I am, but I'd be considered to be from a Catholic and nationalist background. So the fact that I was even making a game about someone theoretically from the other side was kind of a uniquely different approach. And that just allows me to kind of stand up and say why I think this game is worth playing or like existing in the world, because it's harder for anyone else to kind of emulate that. Does that make sense?
Yep.
This is a neat trick that I learned with Rory's Story Cubes, is to ask other people to describe your game back to you. And the reason for that is they will often use much more naturalistic language that is far more interesting to other potential players or publishers. So with Rory Story Cubes, I did a ton of demoing at various events. And when I would demo the game to people, if they didn't automatically say something, I would say, you know, how would you describe this game? And you know, they would say, oh, you know, it's a really great fast-playing storytelling game that stretches your imagination. And I'd be like, okay. And then the next customer who came along, I would use those exact words with them. Because in my head, I wanted to convey, oh, well, it's really worthy, and like, it sparks the brain and the imagination. And because I was too tight to the game, I would often focus on like the mechanics and the depth of it, and that's not what the players want. So by asking the players how they would describe it, it helped me to kind of get other people on board with the game much more quickly. Oh, and sorry, and just in relation to that, blank, someone described it as Uno Legacy. And we're like, yeah, okay, that's the term we're going to use when we talk about this game to anybody else. Obviously not under copyright. So, what is the just enough experience? This, for me, is a crucial one, and apologies to anyone who runs Kickstarters. It's kind of why I personally why I don't back Kickstarters, or reluctantly do it. My view is I want the game played as quickly as possible and as frequently as possible with players, so that they're also sharing it with other people, and that they will joyfully pay money for any other content around that game that I might produce in the future. And so when I talk about just enough, I talk about like playtime, depth of game, the cost of the game as well. So an example, so I kind of have this here. So looking at this, and you can't feel the heft of it, but I'm wondering, like, how much would you price this game at?
30 euros. 40 euros, yeah.
20.
Hold the box for a second.
Oh.
30.
So close, it's like $40. And the reason for that, when we started with this game, we wanted to make, you know, a kind of fast-playing arena combat game, very visually attractive, and the initial idea was to have minis in it that you could like swap so that people could represent themselves in the game in terms of gender and identity. But we immediately went, if we make minis, this is just going to push the cost of this game out of the reach of the people we want to reach. And one of the people I wanted to reach, and I do this when I make games, is I often write a profile of who is the player of this game. And in this, it was a boy I had met in Texas in an after-schools club. He was from kind of Hispanic background. His mum was busy working. He had to go to the club afterwards. And my view was like, this is a game for him. So whenever I was making the game, I was thinking, his parents could maybe buy that for him for Christmas if he asked for it. Like, what would be a fairly reasonable price that they might be willing to pay to have this game for their child? And around the time in the US, 40 would have been like a little bit of a stretch, but would have been kind of okay as, definitely okay as a Christmas present, maybe a bit of a stretch as a birthday present. And it's a really interesting model that Lego use for how they price all their products as well. So that to me was the just enough experience in terms of price. In terms of gameplay, the gameplay in this starts off fairly basic, where you're learning the fundamentals of the game. It's quite chess-like. But again, enough happens in that game to make you want to come back and learn more. And in the act of playing, you're rewarded. You gain Prisma points, you level up. And the game is like layering in more complexity as you play that game. And it gives you the choice of how you want to level up within that. So our plan was to have expansions for this that people would joyfully then pay for, because they had got a lot of value out of the initial product as well. Because it breaks my heart when I look at a shelf and I see I've got the core game and I've got all of these expansions that I'm not using. But I was worried about missing out during the Kickstarter. So what is unique and how might I amplify it? So what I try to do when I'm looking at a game is find like, what's the special twist in this game, and then how do we just magnify that as much as possible so that everything in the game informs that. And I've kind of two examples. One again is with Prisma Arena. So we wanted an arcadey style combat game and move away from like the kind of dark arena combat games that were kind of on the market at the time. And so I was explaining to my daughter about this. I have 3 daughters. And I said, you know, you're sparring and you're fighting each other, you're training to become guardians of hope. And she said, oh, so you're not trying to kill each other, you're trying to make each other stronger. And I was like, you know what? No white dude would ever say this about a combat game. And I went, that's exactly what this game is going to be about. So we changed the whole notion of you're now sparring with each other because you're training. Even if you lose the game, as long as you reach a threshold of like effort, you gain points which help you to level up as well. So there's never a feeling of, you beat me. It's like, oh, that was a good fight. Okay, let's go again. Like, that was the goal. And the whole idea of fighting for hope in a time of despair, again, everything, just any aspect of the game fed back into itself. Even the rulebook in here is about, when you start reading it, it says, welcome recruit. And it takes you through how to play the game from the very beginning. Like, you set up the game and you start doing the basics. And we developed that with a mother and her 3 kids, because mostly it's the mother who's going to be teaching the game in a lot of families, especially with the kind of family game. So from our perspective, the mother has to know how to play the game. That's because she's going to be teaching the children along the way. Let me see, I had another example. Yes, so I'm helping some people with a game at the moment, and it's a kind of they said it's a cooperative dungeon crawler where you're kind of feeling powerful, working together to fight the big bad boss. I don't have to go into the specifics of it. But we were like, okay, but how do you actually feel like you're working together? Because we were all doing individual things. So the kind of mechanic we came up with was, instead of you gaining powers that benefit you individually, they only benefit by the actions that the other players have taken. So again, if anyone has watched me kind of play testing, I'll kind of mentally get myself into the game and the character in that game and what would they want to do. So in this case, I was thinking, okay, for a team, we've probably got like set moves that we're trying to set up and perform it in this game. And that's when teams feel powerful, like the X-Men. You know, they've got their synergistic actions that they do together. So, so they implemented this idea of characters gain abilities that trigger off what other players are doing. So they can't do them themselves. The other player has to have done something to enable them to react to that. And then in contrast, they have a dueling system. So this again highlights the power of working as a team when you're suddenly on your own and you can't call on the help of your other players. So that's the idea of, if cooperation is key to this game, you can contrast it often and heighten it by doing the opposite, by forcing players to act on their own and realize they don't have the support of the team as well. Okay, oh, I've gotten to these quite quickly actually, sorry. This is kind of like my most contentious one with my colleagues, which is me and friends, is how can I eliminate hand waving? I'm going to have to put down the mic for this. Hang on. Sorry. So, I'll start with, when someone asks, why is this rule in the game? Well, it was kind of like I was having this problem with X and I put Y in. And for me, when someone starts waving their hands like that, it's like it's a cover for the fact that they haven't really worked out why the rule is there in the first place. And to me, so in our team, like when someone would start doing it, I'm like, you're doing it. Like, oh, shit. Like, but it's an invitation to push further. Like, if I was being really brutal, I would go, it's lazy design. It's like, I'll do this thing, oh, it's kind of good enough. But to me, it's an invitation that if you catch yourself hand waving, to go, well, what are you really trying to achieve? Like, what are you trying to have happen in this moment? And your brain will ache and it will hurt and you'll want to run from the room because you haven't found a solution. But by really drilling into that, quite often that's when you'll get the gold for the game. You'll reach through and find something that maybe helps the game align even better with the theme that you have going on in the game and the other mechanics. Because for me, like, a beautiful game is when I look at it and I go, I can't separate the theme and the mechanic here. Like, they're so well integrated, I can't tell which came first. And that requires, for me, that requires me to really push through the hand waving that might happen. That make sense? Okay, so, I was going to get you to talk to each other and like work stuff out, but I saw the pattern of the talk, so I'm not going to do that. But I might ask people to share with the group. So these are like my 6 questions that I ask quite a lot. And I'm really curious if other people have questions that they ask themselves that they find really effective when it comes to game design, because I'm going to take notes. And if we don't, then I'm open to just general questions as well. But does anyone have a question that they use that's like, oh yeah, that's my go-to question when I'm designing?